Buenos dias, everyone. Hello, this is Mr. Burns, also known as Professor Fuego. And what we're looking at today is we've gone through what we do before reading. And one of the main purposes is not only to set a purpose for your reading, but also you should know what the main idea of that text is. And the way you figure out the main idea of the text is just to do the preview. So let's take a look at some of the things that I believe we need to take a look at. And the first one, you know what? We need to get better with our reading. I've been saying that this for most of the year. When you look at what our MCA scores were last spring, it says 45% of us were in the proficient and exceeds category. In fact, about 6 or 7 kids were in the exceeds. So that means you got 55% reading below grade level. When you look at this year's iReady tests, and that's the graph on the right. The first one was the graph on the left was the MCAs. The graph on the right is our iReady reading placement. And you can see that only 12 students out of the whole 6th grade were at grade level or higher than that. So we got some work to do here. And becoming a better reader is hard work. Closing that reading gap, usually we can't do it in a week. We can't do it in a month. It's going to take more like a year, and we have to work very hard to do that. It is not all bad news, though. We used to have a thing called the Million Words Club, and that's when we used Accelerated Reader. We could kind of keep track of the word counts a little bit better. I've been working hard with my advisory kids to keep their word counts, and this is what my advisory looked like this year. So my best reader, and I'll just circle that, read 90,000 words. Hey, and that's not too bad. If you think about making 500,000 words in a year, you need to read about 100,000 words a quarter. So I have one student that's on pace to do that. I'm kind of concerned because 3 of my students read 0 books for the whole quarter. So the likelihood for them of closing a reading gap is really tough because they're just not reading enough. And as I said before, if you want to be a better reader, the thing that you have to do is put in that hard work of reading and read a lot. One of the reasons why Americans are kind of lagging behind in their reading is that there's just a lot more competition for your attention. And a lot of that competition comes from our phones or the activities that we're involved in. So again, to improve your reading ability, you have to read a lot. Let's take a look at the next slide here. And on this one, we're moving from what we do before reading to what we're doing while we read. So our goal here during reading is always to comprehend that text, or another word of saying comprehend the text is to understand the text. To do this, you have to have a really active mind. So you've set that purpose. What are you going to know when you're done? And a big thing that you need to do is self-monitor. Self-monitor means I am constantly asking myself if I understand the text. And if I don't understand the text, then I'm jumping back to reread some more. One of the other things that we do while we're reading is make connections to the text. So that's important. Up at the, let's see, up at the, no, I don't really have that on this one. But one of the things a good reader does is they adjust their reading rate. So if the text is easy, they can read a little bit faster. If the text is challenging, like most of your textbooks, you have to slow down and put more time and effort into that. And you're probably going to have to reread passages in order to understand them. So our goal during reading is to understand what we've read. So here's where I think one of our problems is. When we're assigned a text, we can either understand it or we can get it done. So I have this competition between understanding versus getting it done. And what I think most middle schoolers are, and I probably was that way when I was a 5th, 6th, and 7th grader and an 8th grader, is when I was told to read, hey, that means get it done. So if we were told to read 20 to 25, I jumped right in and I plowed my way through it. And when I finished, I was done. And I never ever worried about, did I really understand what I just read? So I think most middle school students probably fall into that category where they just want to get it done. Whereas if they were reading with a purpose, they would self monitor, you know, checking to make sure that they understand that text. They would make a lot of connections between their life and that text, the things that they know and the text, the places that they've been and the text. There are a lot of different ways we can make connections. And they may be even trying to visualize, playing a movie in their mind of what's happening as they read that text. Some of this is review, and it's worth repeating it again and again, is that during reading, it's important to stop and think about what you've read. And if you understand it, you can go ahead. If you don't understand it, you need to back up and read some more. You need to pay attention to vocabulary. Do you understand these vocabulary words? And if you don't, back up and reread or look up those vocabulary words. If the text is hard, you got to slow yourself down. If it's easy, you can speed up. Most of your textbooks, the texts are a little bit more challenging. They're not like novels, so they do require you to slow down and spend more time on it. And also try to make predictions as you read. What do you think is going to happen next? And when you're all finished, can you retell what that page was about? If you can't retell it, you don't know, you didn't comprehend, and you need to go back and do some more reading. All right, next, what we want to do is kind of take a look at making connections. And there are a ton of different ways to make connections to what you've read. Some of the ways are, how does this connect to your life? How does it connect to things that you've already know? Can you relate it to some other books? Sometimes you're making a connection between classes. So you might hear something in English class that you can apply to science class. You can definitely make connections to your personal experiences or travel. You can make connections with what you're reading to other books. You can make connections to current events. With history, you're often connecting what's happening now to something that's happened in a different time period. You should try to make connections between people, and that includes historical figures. You can make connections to the media and what's happening out there. So there are probably 5,000 different ways to make connections. And if you are making connections while you're reading, hey, good for you. You're keeping an active mind. An active mind has a much better chance of understanding the text. And remember, our goal is to understand the text, not just to get through it. So this is Mr. Burns signing off. The first thing that we learned this year is that we should figure out the main idea before we start to read. And we figure out a main idea by previewing. During the reading, it's important always to kind of check your reading to make sure that you are understanding what you've read. And if you're not understanding, you need to use a fix it up strategy. That is, going back somehow to understand either that reading material or those vocabulary words that you're missing out on. You're always interacting with the text. Um, During reading, you want to be a very active reader. And also, you want to avoid distraction too, because distraction is one of the big killers of comprehension. Well, that's all I got for you. So I'm going to sign off. If you want to watch any part of this video again, please feel free to do that.